Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Violeta was holding a gun in her outstretched hand, aiming at Elias's heart. "Don't move, do you hear me? One step, and I'll shoot, understood? I'm not joking." "Violeta, what are you doing?" Elias' face paled with horror, and he backed towards the door. "Darling, calm down. I don't understand what's happening." "You understand perfectly well," Violeta said firmly. Her eyes flashed with anger, and the tiny crystals in her wedding dress sparkled, reflecting the lamplight. "I heard everything, Elias." The groom covered his face with his hands and fell to his knees. And yet, this could have been the happiest night of her life. But how did it come to be that on their wedding night, the bride pointed a gun at the groom? How tragic fate can be sometimes. The mother chose the name Violeta. She really looked like Violeta. Her hair had indeed grown long, thick, and obedient. It was a pleasure to comb and braid them. The braid became her favorite hairstyle, growing longer with each passing year. Even at the age when all the girls began to experiment with hairstyles, Violeta remained loyal to her braid. Once, a classmate, who was a rough and outspoken girl, grabbed Violeta's braid and said, "Where are my big scissors? It's time to get rid of this rustic mess." Violeta turned around and pushed the offender with all her might. The girl didn't expect she would resist, so she lost her balance and fell to the floor. "Don't you dare, or I will cut your long tongue with these scissors right after you do the same with my braid," Violeta said loudly. Violeta was tall, statuesque, and had a proud bearing. She carried herself like a queen, although she came from a very poor family, living in a small private house on the outskirts of the city. Violeta lived together with her mother, Andrea Gonzalez, and her younger sister, Augusta, as well as with her husband, Domingo, and two children, 10-year-old Pablo and 5-year-old Olia. They lived in poverty but in harmony, always helping and supporting each other. Violeta never knew her father. He abandoned his beloved when she was pregnant. Her mother raised Violeta alone. "It just happened, my dear, that Rodolfo, your father, turned out to be a weak man," Violeta's mother would recount. "We loved each other deeply, but he was afraid that his family wouldn't accept a bride like me. I wouldn't fit into their wealthy lives. When it turned out that I was expecting a child, Rodolfo said he would talk to his relatives, somehow softening them. He said he would go to his father, fall at his feet, repent, and beg them to accept us. Rodolfo's family didn't live here, they resided in another city. He would come here for business. In short, when Rodolfo went home, he never returned. I have been waiting for him, but I never saw him again. And then only kind people told me that he got married. So I decided to erase him from my heart. I decided, no matter how difficult it might be, I will raise you alone. I won't ask for his gifts. I was betrayed, but there's no way back." Violeta was listening to her mother, absorbing her thoughts, and trying to imitate her in everything. "In this life, my dear, one must achieve everything through their own hard work," Andrea said, "and never give up. Those who overcome the ascent step by step will conquer any peak." Violeta was clever and diligent, so she was the best student in the class. Her mother was proud of her achievements, friends admired her, and foes envied her but didn't dare harm her. Violeta not only knew how to stand up for herself, but also stood up for others. Once, a new boy came to their class. He could barely read. And this was in middle school. The boy, Timoteo, grew up in a troubled family, or rather, he didn't really have a family. Timoteo would sometimes live with heavy drinking and constantly quarreling parents, then with a grandmother who had fallen into dementia, and then with some distant relatives who saw him solely as free labor for gardening. Timoteo was short, skinny, and pale. He wore second-hand clothes and constantly pulled his head into his shoulders as if expecting a blow. Once, when he was called to answer a question in class, he got so flustered that he started crying. "Timoteo, why are you crying? You're such a grown-up boy, but you're still crying like a little one. Aren't you ashamed?" Someone from the class said, and scornful laughter rolled through the class. It's a shame to laugh when another person is crying, Violeta said, and the class fell silent. After the lesson, Timoteo timidly approached Violeta. Here, he said, handing her a candy in a bright red wrapper. Take it, it's delicious. Thank you, Violeta said, but she didn't take the gift. I can't eat these. Why? The boy wondered. Not even one candy? It's of peanut choco, Violeta explained to him. And I'm allergic to peanuts. Even a little peanut could kill me. I don't have anything else, Timoteo said, flustered. It's okay. Then let's just be friends. Violeta took Timoteo under her wing and started helping him with his studies. Within a couple of months, he started doing much better, although he didn't become a top student. Timoteo settled for getting C's and B's in all subjects except for singing, where he always had a solid A. The boy had perfect pitch and a decent, albeit weak, singing voice. Violeta and Timoteo remained close friends until senior high school. Timoteo, not aiming to achieve great heights, wanted to acquire a vocational skill and start working as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Violeta set her sights on a challenging goal. She was determined to get into university, not just with any major, but finance and credit. Violeta, you're certainly smart, but there are only wealthy kids studying there, Timoteo told her when she voiced her goal. Well, I also have a chance, Violeta retorted. I'm really interested in this field. I've always wanted to understand all these financial flows, I mean how the economy works, how it can be improved, so that regular people like us have more prospects. You're bold, Violeta. But I'm afraid this goal might not be your cup of tea, her friend said. I'll prepare with all my might, the girl said fervently. And you, Timoteo, could follow your dream too. You sing so beautifully to the guitar and write wonderful songs. You could become an artist. But Timoteo was skeptical about it. He didn't believe he could achieve recognition as a musician, and he didn't want to end up like one of those who play in the subway, collecting money in a guitar case. He was afraid everyone would make fun of him and judge him. Violeta studied so diligently that there was no time for anything else. Her peers fell in love with boys, went on dates, suffered from love, and rejoiced in it. Meanwhile, Violeta continued to study, burying her nose in textbooks. But no matter how hard she tried, she still couldn't get into her desired major on the first attempt. Upon learning that she hadn't been accepted into the university, Violeta had been crying for 2 days, and then she told her family. Well, it means I didn't work hard enough. I'll work even harder and apply again next year. But what will you do this year, Violeta? Her mother asked. I'll try to find a job so I'm not dependent on you, Mom. If you want, you can work as a cleaner for us at first, her Aunt Susanna suggested. She worked as a cook at the Golden Pitcher restaurant. The pay is not great, of course, but don't take offense, I can't offer anything better. Thank you, Aunt Susanna. You know I'm not afraid of hard work. Any job will do for now, and maybe something better will come along later. Well done, Violeta. You're a true fighter. Uncle Domingo chuckled approvingly. You're a smart girl. You'll go far. Violeta started working as a cleaner. She didn't complain even though she had to carry heavy buckets, which caused her back and arms to ache due to the lack of habit. She didn't grimace when she had to scrub off stuck-on scraps from the floor and clean up shards of broken dishes. Drunken guests often carelessly knocked plates off the table. Violeta was just amazed at how brazenly and rudely people, who seemed respectable, behaved. They shouted at each other, harassed other people's wives. And sometimes they even fought. And it wasn't just some drunkards from the outskirts, it was financial elites, officials, and even parliament members. Despite not all visitors behaving politely, Violeta grew to love the Golden Pitcher. It was a very beautiful and cozy restaurant with 2 large halls, high ceilings, intricate moldings, and enormous chandeliers. Musicians performed in the evenings. The guests didn't always give them the attention they deserved. There were bards singing love ballads to the guitar, soulful opera divas, and young, audacious pop singers performing in revealing outfits. In the golden picture, Violeta felt like she was in a fairy tale palace. Of course, for now, she was just a humble cleaner. But after all, Cinderella didn't immediately go to the ball. Violeta had formed good relationships with her co-workers. Aunt Susanna introduced Violeta to the waitstaff and chefs. "This is my niece. She's smart and beautiful. She has a great future ahead of her, so I recommend being friends with her." Violeta laughed. "For now, I'm just mopping floors and taking out trash. But I really would like to achieve more." After working on weekends, Violeta studied. She sincerely tried to fit in as much as possible, set aside a portion of her salary to pay for tutoring. She was determined to get into finance and credit, and her desire only grew stronger. Immersed in her endeavors, she didn't notice the changes in her mother's behavior. Andrea became somewhat sad and contemplative. She would often sit, staring into the distance with furrowed brows, and sometimes seemed to be talking quietly with someone. Eventually, she announced that the entire family needed to discuss a very important piece of news. Late one evening, Andrea, Violeta, Aunt Susanna, and Uncle Domingo gathered around the kitchen table. Pablo was trying to eavesdrop, but Andrea sternly shooed him away. "This topic isn't for children. It's time for bed." "I just wanted to eat something before going to bed," Pablo defended himself. "Your conversations are not in my interest." However, Violeta noticed that when he left the kitchen, Pablo lingered behind the door. He must have been really curious. "I gathered you all, my dear," Andrea began, to deliver some news. She took a theatrical pause. "Oh, I don't know how to say this." "Don't drag it, for God's sake," Aunt Susanna urged. "I don't even know what to think about." "Just hope it's not cancer," Uncle Domingo whispered, staring intently at Andrea with wide eyes filled with fear. "You've gotten so pale. They say people look better in a coffin." "Thank you, Domingo, for the compliment," Andrea retorted. "But thank God, I'm healthy. It's something else." "Do you remember Rudolfo, Violeta's father?" "Sure, we do remember him. He was quite a fool," Uncle Domingo even cursed. "And what does he want from us now? Does he want to see his daughter? Well, let her decide whether to forgive such a father. You, Uncle Domingo, are more of a father to me than he ever was. And I don't want to know anything about him. Tell him that, Mom." "I won't be able to tell him anything, my dear. He passed away just recently." The family fell into an uneasy silence. No one could express grief for the death of a person who had hurt them. But they also couldn't rejoice in someone else's misfortune. "He's dead." And when they opened the will, it turned out he left a part of his money to you, Violeta, her mother finally spoke. "He never had any children with his wife. It so happened that you're his only daughter. Your father's money is now yours, Violeta. I don't know what you'll decide. Whether you'll accept it or refuse." "I don't need them," Violeta exclaimed, but her mother cut her off. "I know, my girl, that you've grown up just like me. You don't need anyone's handouts. But I wanted to discuss this because it's a complicated matter. We're all in the same boat, and you can't make such an important decision without consulting everyone. Look at our situation. The house needs major repairs. Domingo can't do it all by himself. And Domingo could use a bit of repair himself." Here Andrea, seemingly, decided to take revenge for the "they say people look better in a coffin" remark. "Look how hunched over he is, almost humpbacked. And then there's Susanna, who hasn't had a vacation in years, and the kids, who would benefit from joining clubs and activities. Young Pablo is such a troublemaker. His energy could be channeled into something peaceful. Think about it, Violeta. I believe you're smart and hardworking, and you'll definitely succeed in life. But we need the money right now." Violeta pondered. It was easy to reject her father's money when it concerned her own needs, but she couldn't be selfish. She had to think about others. Uncle Domingo, Aunt Susanna, Pablo, and Olia, they were all part of her family, and if there was an opportunity to make their lives better with her father's money, then why not? But there was one but. I have one condition, Violeta finally said. I'll accept the inheritance, but only if you, Mom, promise me one thing in return, to accept any gifts I buy with that money. Promise me that you won't refuse them, won't purse your lips, and won't say that it's the money of that scoundrel Rudolfo. Andrea sighed. What a condition, my dear. It won't be easy for me to agree to that. But I guess I'll have to swallow my pride. And one more thing, Violeta added after some thought, I would like to visit his grave. On the day Violeta came to her father's grave, the weather was sunny. Flowers were blooming on the old graves. Birds were singing loudly in the branches of tall trees. Wreaths were piled high on the grave. Violeta had come to the city where her father's family lived for just one day. She dressed in black as was customary, lit a candle, stuck it into the mound of the grave, and watched as the flame danced. Hello, she said quietly. I will never be able to call you a father, but still, thank you. I will try to use the money you left me wisely. You weren't involved in raising me. You did nothing at all to make me a better person, but I hope I've become one anyway. Goodbye. Violeta turned around and walked away from the cemetery. As soon as money appeared in their large family, there were numerous ways to spend it: house repairs, lessons for Pablo and Olia, a seaside trip for Susanna, massage sessions for Domingo and his aching back, and new things for Mom. And most importantly, now Violeta seriously embarked on preparing to enter the university. She hired good tutors, awaiting the entrance exams with the impatience of a young, energetic dog straining at the leash. Her efforts paid off. A year later, Violeta was admitted to the university in the coveted major of finance and credit. Timoteo, her friend who knew all the ups and downs of Violeta's life, was by then already working on a construction site. Now you, Violeta, will truly distance yourself from us, ordinary people, he said sadly. You won't be interested in listening if I start talking about my workdays. You're my friend, Timoteo, and you'll always remain one, Violeta replied. I even offered you assistance. You could have tried to pursue music professionally. Do you remember how our singing teacher praised you? She praised me only because I at least tried to sing, instead of yelling and walking on my head throughout the lesson like the other boys, Timoteo retorted. With my weak voice, they wouldn't even hire me as a conductor. Violeta just shook her head. Timoteo was so lacking in self-confidence. She valued her friend for his kindness and sensitivity, but couldn't understand his shyness and indecision. Just don't cut off your braid, he suddenly asked softly. As long as I see you as I remember you from my school years, I believe that you're my friend Violeta. That same girl who stood up for me in front of our classmates. Violeta hugged Timoteo and kissed him on the cheek. I will always be the same Violeta, I promise. University education opened doors to a different world for the girl. In Violeta's group, there were various students. Contrary to Timoteo's prejudices, most of them came from ordinary families. However, there were also those who could be called privileged, children of wealthy parents, spoiled and self-willed. They acted disrespectfully towards the instructors, often skipped lectures, constantly bragged about expensive gadgets, and arrived for classes in luxurious cars. Such individuals always mentioned in their conversations the names of trendy clubs, where they often spent their time. Phrases like "we had a blast," "need to do it again," and "we partied so hard yesterday that I can't think straight today" were typical for such students. Violeta, who unexpectedly inherited wealth, could also afford such a lifestyle, but she wasn't interested in such amusements. She didn't like loud music and flashing lights in clubs. She loved to study, and parties didn't attract her. Violeta quickly became one of the top students in her class. Her teachers praised her and held her up as an example to other students. The first exam session was approaching. Even the arrogant elites had sobered up. Fear appeared in many eyes, and instead of discussions about clubs, they started speaking on different topics. If I fail the exams, my dad won't give me money. One day, as Violeta stood in the corridor reading her notes before class, a young man approached her. "Hi." "Sorry for interrupting." Violeta looked up. The guy was of the same height as her, fair-haired, slim, even skinny, with delicate facial features and incredibly expressive, simply huge, blue eyes. Usually, when girls saw that the guy had such eyes, they started to envy him. Without any makeup or mascara, they looked expressive. He was dressed in a simple, light blue shirt and jeans. So most likely, he wasn't an elite, but rather someone from the regular crowd. "You're Violeta Gonzalez, right? They say you haven't missed a single lecture." The guy charmingly smiled. "Can I ask for your help? Can you lend me your notes? I'll run downstairs, one foot here, the other there." On the first floor, there was a copy machine that worked if you inserted a coin. There was always a huge queue of students who were too lazy to take their own notes and preferred to make use of other people's efforts. There weren't many like Violeta who diligently transcribed every word of the professor. Many relied on their memory, while some preferred to record lectures on a dictaphone. However, as the exam session drew closer, students increasingly realized a simple truth: nothing better than good old-fashioned notes had been invented, containing all the crucial information, devoid of unnecessary details, with key concepts carefully highlighted in different colors, and rules framed within boxes. "Yes, of course, you can make a copy." Violeta handed her notebook to the guy. "Thanks, I'll be quick." The guy was already about to rush off, but he turned around and, smiling brightly, introduced himself. "By the way, I'm Elias." Elias took Violeta's notes and vanished. In vain, the girl was waiting for him, glancing at the lecture hall doors. He seemed to have disappeared into thin air. He only reappeared when classes were already over and the teacher had let the students go home. Elias, panting and slightly flushed, handed Violeta her notebook. "I'm sorry. The copy machine on the first floor broke down. I rushed to the adjacent building, but there was such a queue." "It's okay." Violeta took her slightly disheveled notebook from his hands. "It's not your fault that things turned out this way." "Here's a small reward," Elias said, pulling a Snickers bar from his pocket. "Treat yourself." "Thank you, but no," Violeta said, shaking her head. "I don't eat those." "Are you on a diet?" Elias widened his already large eyes. "Come on. You're already slim enough. And very beautiful," he added, slightly embarrassed. "No, I'm not on a diet. I have a peanut allergy." "A Snickers bar would kill me," Violeta replied. "Somehow, in our country, it's customary to offer chocolates as a reward for any favor, and more often than not, they're filled with nuts. Honestly, I'm tired of explaining to everyone that I have an allergy." "What a pity." Elias widened his eyes again, this time out of sympathy. "Well then, let me offer you a different reward. How about going to the movies with me tomorrow? Hopefully, you're not allergic to Leonardo DiCaprio?" "No, I'm not allergic to him, but..." "Do you have a jealous boyfriend?" Elias squinted suspiciously. "No. I just have an exam the day after tomorrow, and I need to prepare." "Then let's go the day after tomorrow, after the exam. We can celebrate as well." Violeta couldn't refuse Elias. His charm and persistence won her over. Going to the cinema was the beginning of their relationship. Elias was charming, cracked jokes a lot, and knew how to lift Violeta's spirits. Moreover, it turned out that, like Violeta, Elias didn't know his father. He was raised by a single mother. Unlike the responsible, serious girl, Elias was a bit of a rascal. He often skipped classes and loved entertainment. One should know how to not only work but also have fun, he would often tell Violeta. Don't be stuck in books all the time, otherwise, you'll miss out on life itself. At the very start of their relationship, Violeta introduced Elias to her family. Andrea didn't like Elias. He's just too much like the late Rudolfo, she said. He was the same, he knew how to charm. He's not a bad guy, just skinny, Aunt Susanna, the cook, remarked. He should eat more. Well, he should also get into sports, build some muscle, Uncle Domingo added. What if some thugs attack you, Violeta, and he can't even defend you? Violeta can take care of herself against thugs, Andrea waved her hand. She's a bold girl, but kind and naive. And this Elias. I hope they won't end up with the same story as mine with Rodolfo. That won't happen, Mom, Violeta said calmly. I've decided that Elias and I won't have intimacy until we're married, so that it doesn't turn into a use and leave situation. You're so wise, her mother said, shaking her head. Just be cautious. Outsmarting fate isn't easy. You may scare it out of the door, but it might sneak in through the window. If it's meant for someone to break your heart, no matter how hard you try, it will happen. Violeta also introduced Elias to Timoteo. Her friend also didn't like her boyfriend. He seemed so unserious. Always joking around, fidgeting. As if he wants to show off to everyone, look at me, I'm a star. He reminds me of a stage comedian. Well, unlike you, Elias isn't afraid to be the center of attention, Violeta teased her friend, you are a modest one. Well, if he's such a show-off, he should have tried auditioning for the acting department, Timoteo grumbled. Just know that I don't like him. Violeta shook her head. You're just jealous, but it's in vain. Although I love Elias, you're still my friend. And over time, you'll realize that Elias is a great guy and not your competitor at all. Elias introduced Violeta to his mother much later. What struck Violeta about this woman was how young she seemed. Only by closely observing Caterina Santos' face could one notice that she was far from 30 years old. She was a true beauty's tall, with wonderful flowing blonde hair, piercing turquoise eyes, and an authoritative manner. She carried herself like a queen, yet she showed favor to Violeta and immediately started calling her darling. Darling, I'll be honest with you, my son is quite a slacker, and I see it as your task to turn him into a decent member of society, she said, looking up to the sky. Violeta objected. Caterina, you're too harsh on your son. Elias is a good person, and all his shortcomings are just minor mistakes typical of youth. After their meeting, Elias whispered to Violeta. My mom really liked you. She said she believes that you'll guide me on the right path. Thanks to Violeta's efforts, Elias passed the summer session without any C's, which pleased him greatly. To celebrate this achievement, Elias suggested going to the sea, and Violeta agreed. This trip was a paradise for her, with a warm sea, delicious food, gentle sun, and most importantly, her beloved by her side. Elias cracked jokes, bought Violeta various charming souvenirs, seashell bracelets, postcards with seaside views, and amusing magnets that Violeta gave to all her friends and acquaintances upon her return. It was a beautiful summer. The lovers were happy, and nothing clouded their carefree fun. In the autumn, Elias proposed to Violeta, and she agreed. She was head over heels in love with Elias, his cheerful personality, his wide smile, and his huge blue eyes looking at her with such admiration and tenderness. They decided to celebrate the wedding at the Golden Pitcher venue. Violeta couldn't deny herself the pleasure of appearing in the restaurant not as a cleaner but as a bride. How many times, lugging heavy buckets, had she thought that one day luck would turn its face towards her? How much she had wanted, back then, as a poor girl forced to make a living through hard physical labor, to find herself in the shoes of the restaurant guests, polished rich people dressed in expensive attire. And now, her wish would come true. Choosing a wedding dress was a challenge. The wedding was planned after the winter exam session. They needed to find an outfit in which the bride wouldn't freeze during outdoor photography. Violeta tried on numerous dresses. Some dresses were too extravagant, others too narrow and uncomfortable, and others excessively flashy. In the end, Violeta settled on a dress with open shoulders, adorned with small sparkling crystals that shimmered like tiny stars. The dress came with a white fur stole that could be worn during outdoor photography, as well as a charming muff to hide the bride's frozen hands. Together, it looked very elegant. Violeta resembled an enchanting snow queen. She asked the hairdresser to create a simple hairstyle, arranging her braid into a beautiful knot at the nape of her neck and decorating it with pins adorned with artificial pearls. The preparations for the wedding delighted Violeta. She was radiating happiness. The only thing that saddened her was when her best friend, Timoteo, told her that he wouldn't be able to attend the wedding. "I'm sorry, but I can't honor my colleagues. Our construction crew is going to another city for 3 months," he said to Violeta, guiltily averting his gaze. "How can you do this?" Violeta was deeply hurt. "I really wanted you to be by my side on this day. It's supposed to be the best day of my life. I was hoping you'd perform a song with the guitar." "You hoped in vain," muttered the guy to himself. "You know I hate performing in public." "You know, Timoteo, I think you're behaving very selfishly." Violeta couldn't hold back. "I warned you that I'd have my wedding soon. And you deliberately decided to go earn money during that time." "I never promised you that I would definitely be at your wedding," Timoteo sharply retorted. "Speaking about selfish people, I'm afraid you're very bad at understanding the true character of people, Violeta." With those words, Timoteo turned and walked away, leaving Violeta alone with her hurt feelings. Anyway, he didn't show up at the wedding, and Violeta regretted deeply that on the day that was supposed to be the most beautiful in her life, Timoteo wasn't by her side. The night before the wedding, Violeta slept poorly. She dreamt that she was running down the university corridor, which suddenly stretched into infinity. She was sprinting forward, and behind her, the long tentacles of some monster were reaching out. Violeta was running with all her might when she suddenly saw that the corridor ended with a locked door. She flew to the door, pulled it towards herself. Darn it, the door was locked. But there was a key sticking out of the lock. Violeta turned it several times, the door opened, and beyond it darkness, from which Elias' voice echoed, "I'm SSS sorry." This elongated S turned into the sound of her alarm clock. Violeta opened her eyes and sat up in bed. Her heart was ready to leap out of her chest. She was worrying too much that everything wouldn't go well. She needed to take deep breaths and relax. Everything was under control. This was her wedding, and it was going to be simply stunning. Next, the usual pre-wedding preparation started. Violeta got dressed in her dress. A hairstylist arrived to style her hair, followed by a makeup artist to do her makeup. Relatives bustled around her. Violeta hardly had a moment to think and be with her thoughts. When they finally left her alone for a few minutes, the groom was about to arrive in a moment. Violeta was standing in front of the mirror, checking if everything was in order with her look. She looked absolutely stunning, like a true princess. "Hands up!" suddenly came from behind her. Caught off guard, Violeta trembled all over. It turned out her nephew Pablo had sneaked up on her, and he held a real-looking toy gun in his hands. "Ditch the gum and candies," the little extortionist said menacingly, "or else you're done for. Where did you get that weapon, you little rascal?" Violeta had come to her senses. "Come on, drop it right now." "Get ready to die," Pablo said with a terrifying voice, and pressed the trigger. Click! A tiny red flower shot out of the gun's barrel and lightly hit Violeta's cheek. "I tricked you," Pablo shouted and was about to run away, but Violeta swiftly caught him and snatched the toy gun from his hand. "I'm not giving it back," she said threateningly, "and don't ask for it." Who came up with the idea to buy such a toy? What if you scared someone with heart problems? They could die from the shock. And this gun looks so real. "It's time to go. The groom has come for the bride's price," Aunt Susanna said. Not knowing where to put the gun so that Pablo wouldn't reach it and cause a commotion at her wedding, Violeta scanned the room with her eyes in a rush. Where could she hide it? Perhaps the safest option was to take this toy with her. Then the little troublemaker definitely wouldn't find it. With those thoughts, Violeta slipped the gun into her pretty white muff and walked out to meet the groom. Violeta. Little Olia rushed towards her in a white lace dress. "You're so beautiful." The child couldn't contain her excitement. She started dancing around Violeta, grabbing onto her dress. "Olia, sweetheart, let me pass. Move aside." Violeta tried to gently push her away. "Here, take this candy." She took a candy from the serving tray and handed it to the girl. Olia unwrapped the candy and put it in her mouth, but she continued dancing around the bride, tugging at her dress, until Aunt Susanna picked her up and carried her away. From there, the wedding followed a well-trodden path. All the women were shedding tears, while the men had embarrassed and moving expressions. At the restaurant reception, the guests relaxed and started drinking. The atmosphere was joyful and lively. The host led one contest after another, and the guests were making noise and getting tipsy. In short, everything was as it should be. Soon they were supposed to announce the newlyweds' dance. Violeta and Elias had prepared for it for a long time, even rehearsing multiple times under the guidance of a professional choreographer. Violeta, Andrea, her mother, quietly approached the bride. "There's a stain on the hem of your dress." Violeta was stunned. She was about to dance in front of the guests, and there was a stain on her dress. What an embarrassment it was. She immediately realized what had caused it. Little Olia, who had been dancing around her, must have stained her dress with chocolate from a candy. What a disappointment. What should she do? She could try to remove the stain. "Mom," Violeta whispered, "if I happen to be late, tell the host to stall." She got up from the table and, trying not to draw attention to herself, headed to the women's restroom. However, there was a long line in front of it. There were so many guests at the wedding. Violeta couldn't wait for long. The announcement of the newlyweds' dance was scheduled for about 10 to 15 minutes. She was about to ask the other women to let her cut in line when she remembered, at the end of the corridor, opposite the service entrance, there was a little room where the janitor kept her mops and rags. There was also a sink in that room. Violeta could quietly remove the stain there without attracting everyone's attention. So that she headed there. The door to the room was never locked. Hardly anyone would think of stealing such treasures as a bunch of mops, buckets, and cleaning supplies. Closing the door behind her, Violeta sighed. Now she could deal with the stain on her dress. She gently lifted the hem, found the dirty spot, turned on the water, and started washing it out. Suddenly, footsteps were heard behind the door. Someone was definitely there, and judging by the sound of footsteps, there were two people. The click of heels suggested that one of them was a woman. Who would need to go to this dark corner? Only those who wanted to discuss some dirty secret in private, away from the other guests. Violeta involuntarily held her breath and listened. She wasn't in the habit of eavesdropping on others, but this time something seemed to have caught her attention to the voices outside. "Everything's ready," she recognized the cold and steady voice of Katerina, her newly acquired mother-in-law. "The pastries will be on the table in your room." "Mom, are you sure we should do it this way?" It was Elias' voice, her husband from just a few hours ago. "Stop whining. I've thought it through. You won't raise suspicion. Trust me." Katerina brushed her son off as if swatting away a pesky fly. "They'll think the hotel staff made a mistake. Or we'll shift the blame onto the pastry chef and sue him for negligence. We'll get compensation for emotional distress. And you're sure this will work?" "Of course. She herself said she has an allergy. I ground up that darn peanut into powder and added it to the dough. You can't even taste it. But for those who have an allergy, the amount in the pastries is more than enough. What if she doesn't die right away?" Elias asked this question so quietly that Violeta could barely make out the words. "What if she suffers for a few hours? You have the whole night ahead of you. Even if she moans or screams, who would think she's screaming from pain and not from passion? If she suffers for a long time, don't look at her. Open YouTube on your phone. Then, when it's all over, you can start shouting, 'Call the police.' Just don't forget what to say. You partied at the wedding, went to the room, and collapsed on the bed. You've been sleeping like the dead and didn't see or hear anything. You ordered the pastries for the room, but you warned that the bride is allergic to peanuts. So you have no idea why the bride passed away. And add some playing tears, hand-wringing, screams that you can't live without her. You can even try to jump out the window for extra persuasiveness, just don't overdo it, or you might actually hurt yourself. Mom, I think it's still too cruel, Elias hesitated. For heaven's sake, don't be such a pushover. We've discussed this 1,000 times. Violeta is not someone who would let you just reach into her pocket. She's a smart girl, and we need money. Think about Paulina. Yeah, Mom, you're right. Let's go. Violeta is in the restroom now. She won't be back soon. There's a kilometer-long line. But still, it's better for us to go back to the dining hall, or they might ask where I've been wandering. Violeta was standing frozen with fear and disbelief. She couldn't believe what she had heard. Could Elias and Katerina really be plotting to cold-bloodedly end her life? And all for the sake of money? Violeta wanted to scream, cry, and shatter everything around her. She wanted to grab Elias by the throat, scratch his face. How could he? She loved him so much. But she couldn't cry. It would smudge her wedding makeup. Violeta wasn't the type to let others walk all over her. She had to be brave and not lose face in front of the public. Pulling herself together, she managed to remove the stain and leave the janitor's closet. The fact that I used to work as a janitor in this restaurant and know where everything is kept essentially saved my life, she thought. A tough ordeal lay ahead of her, but she decided to face it with honor. Here comes the bride, the host exclaimed cheerfully. Finally, we lost you. So it's time for the newlyweds dance. Elias approached Violeta. She gazed into his face. No, if she hadn't overheard that conversation, she would have never guessed he wanted to kill her. He had such amazing, huge, innocent blue eyes. He embraced her, and the couple swirled into a waltz. Everything went off without a hitch. The guests wiped their teary eyes and whispered, "Such a beautiful couple." Even Andrea looked at Elias with warmth. She had stopped suspecting him of wanting to mess with Violeta and leave her, as Rodolfo once did. Aunt Susanna and Uncle Domingo themselves twirled in the waltz. They were a clumsier pair than the newlyweds, so they accidentally bumped into one of the tables, causing plates and glasses to fall to the floor. "It's for good," the guest said, laughing. Violeta laughed along with everyone, although her heart felt heavy. All evening, she had been pondering what to do, how to act. At first, she thought of simply not eating the pastries she would find in the room. She could say that she had eaten so much at the festive dinner that she couldn't fit even a crumb. Or pretend to accidentally drop the plate of pastries on the floor. But the more she thought about what was happening, the more she looked at Elias and his mother, Katerina, the stronger she wanted to unravel this Gordian knot. To show these people that she knew about their criminal plan and wasn't going to become their victim. By the evening, Violeta was completely drained. They entered the hotel room, reserved for their first night, already past midnight. As soon as Elias turned on the light, Violeta saw a plate on the bedside table with 2 beautiful pastries. "Oh, look. Here's a gift from the hotel," Elias said, nodding towards the pastries. "It's so cute." And in that second, Violeta understood what to do. She grabbed her purse, pulled out the pistol she had taken from Pablo the day before, and shouted, "Don't move, do you hear me? 1 step, and I'll shoot, got it?" "I'm not joking." Elias went pale. Even his piercing blue eyes suddenly turned colorless and glassy. "Violeta, what are you doing?" "Sweetheart, calm down. I don't understand what's happening." "I guess you do," Violeta said harshly. Her eyes gleamed with anger, and the tiny crystals sewn onto her wedding dress sparkled, reflecting the lamp's light. "I heard everything, Elias." The groom covered his face with his hands and fell to his knees. "Violeta, forgive me," he sobbed. "I didn't want to, but I had no choice. A person always has a choice, to become a murderer or not, Violeta said firmly. You and your mother planned a horrible, cold-blooded murder. She advised you to watch YouTube videos while I was dying. Both of you are monsters. Violeta, please understand, I need money, Elias trembled in horror. My mother and I are bankrupt. Did you really think I would refuse to give you money? I loved you, after all, there were pain and anger in Violeta's voice. I needed a lot of money, Elias looked at her pitifully, from bottom to top, and preferably, your entire inheritance. I've gambled it all away. My debt is an enormous amount of money. And your mother? What did she need it for? She wanted money for another plastic surgery. It's like a drug for her. She just can't stop. Elias covered his face with his hands again. Forgive us, Violeta. You're monsters. I don't want anything to do with either of you anymore. Violeta, just don't report us to the police. The girl looked at Elias with immense disdain and said, I won't. I pulled the trigger. A tiny red flower shot out of the pistol's barrel, lightly tapping Elias's forehead. Violeta turned around, grabbed her coat, purse, and left the room. She didn't know where she was going, but she was certain that her paths with Elias had diverged forever from this moment on. Hurriedly descending the stairs, Violeta burst into the hotel lobby and threw a few words at the porter. I won't be back. My husband, the man will return the key. She couldn't say the word husband and rushed outside. Winter immediately made itself felt. Violeta draped her half-coat over her exposed shoulders and raised her hand to hail a taxi. One arrived in just a couple of minutes. Only after sitting in the back seat, taking a deep breath, did Violeta realize she didn't know where to go. Tears welled up in her eyes. The driver didn't ask anything, he simply started driving slowly down the road. It was as if he understood that the passenger wanted to go anywhere, as long as it was far from here. Violeta was crying and couldn't stop. She couldn't see anything as tears blurred her gaze. She was trembling, and her heart felt like it was leaping out of her chest. She couldn't utter a word. She was having a true breakdown. All the tension that had built up in her throughout the day, this awfully long day, burst free in an endless stream of tears. Violeta mourned her shattered love, her tarnished trust. How could she live, knowing that the person she considered the closest had wanted to kill her, cold-bloodedly and cruelly? And how sweet Elias used to be, how tender, how he looked at her with those enormous blue eyes, how lovingly he spoke to her, what wonderful gifts he gave. It was unbearable. Barely calming down, Violeta broke into sobs once again. The car was going in an unknown direction, circling the area, passing the same shopping center for the third or fourth time, but Violeta didn't notice. She didn't see the city's bright lights, the fancy storefronts still adorned with Christmas decorations. The only thing she noticed was her pain, which was piercing her heart with 1,000 knives. The runaway bride? The taxi driver finally asked. He was an elderly man with lush gray mustaches. Violeta nodded. She couldn't speak. The driver smiled at her and said, "Lucky one." She shook her head and asked with a bitter smirk, "Are you mocking me?" "Why would I? I'm telling the truth." "Happy is the one who managed to escape fate," philosophically noted the man. "You'll understand later." "So, where are we headed?" Violeta didn't want to appear at home. Not now. She simply didn't have the strength to tell her mother, Aunt Susanna, and Uncle Domingo about everything. Telling her family about what had happened was like reliving it all over again. She didn't want to do it. "To a hotel somewhere, where I can spend the night," Violeta finally said. "Morning is wiser than evening." The taxi driver nodded. He didn't say anything more to the passenger. And Violeta, having calmed down a little, started looking out the window at the winter city. She liked the hotel the taxi driver chose. It was much more modest than the hotel where she and Elias were supposed to spend their wedding night, but it still looked decent. Not some rundown motel by the highway. After paying for the night, Violeta entered the room and collapsed onto the bed. She was devilishly tired, but she needed to pull herself together, take off the detested wedding dress, take a shower. It would make things easier. Surprisingly, Violeta fell asleep as soon as her head touched the pillow. She woke up early. Even though she had a headache, she wasn't as broken as yesterday. Glancing at her phone, she saw a bunch of messages from her loved ones. "Are you okay?" From her mom, "How was the night?" From Aunt Susanna, "Was the groom good?" From Uncle Domingo, "Where's my gun?" From Pablo. There were also a few missed calls from an unknown number. She had to respond. "Everything's fine," to her mom. "The night went great," to Aunt Susanna. "The groom did well," to Uncle Domingo. And "the police confiscated the weapon," to Pablo. Violeta didn't bother calling the unknown number. Most likely, it was just another spammer offering some kind of credit with an especially advantageous interest rate. She would tell them the truth someday when she gathered the strength. According to the plan, she and Elias were supposed to fly to Turkey for a week. It was great. She had a week to think about how to move forward. Sadly, the only person she was willing to discuss what had happened with, Timoteo, was far away now. Violeta thought about how he had always been the closest person to her. He wouldn't have yelled like her mother, he wouldn't have summoned all the heavenly wrath upon Elias like Aunt Susanna, he wouldn't have volunteered to beat up the scoundrel like Uncle Domingo. Timoteo would have said something wise and right, finding the most fitting words to ease the pain of a broken heart. How sad it was that he wasn't by her side. Violeta realized that she didn't want to see that hateful wedding dress. She had ordered a few items online, and a courier was supposed to deliver them directly to the hotel. Later, she ordered breakfast for the room. She didn't have much appetite, but she needed to replenish her energy. After the courier delivered the items, Violeta tried them on and was satisfied. Now she could go out without drawing attention with her wedding dress. No one would know she was a runaway bride. The white faux fur coat combined with simple jeans and boots didn't look like part of a wedding outfit, it looked quite ordinary. She decided to leave the dress in the room. If it were up to her, she would have burned it, but circumstances didn't favor such a performance. Violeta dialed Timoteo's number several times, but he didn't pick it up. She messaged him, "Call me. We need to talk." He replied, "Busy. We'll call you in the evening." And then an idea came to her mind. What if she went to see him? She desperately wanted to see Timoteo, so she immediately started looking for tickets and booking a hotel. She would surprise him. Even though the news she wanted to share with him wasn't happy, Violeta was sure that Timoteo would be glad to see her. She imagined his serious face, furrowed brows, dark gray eyes, full of sorrow and sympathy. He had warned her, he sensed that Elias was a dummy, that he didn't truly love Violeta. But she hadn't listened, and now she would have to, burning with shame, tell Timoteo about it. She could already imagine Timoteo clenching his fists, the anger igniting in his calm eyes. Of course. She would go to him right now. But there were no tickets for today's trains. Violeta cursed herself, bought tickets for tomorrow, and also reserved a hotel. Well, fine, she would spend the whole day in bed today. Maybe she'd watch TV or... Then her phone rang. Timoteo. Violeta thought excitedly, but then she saw that it was a call from an unknown number. However, she still answered. "Hello," she said, "I'm listening." "Violeta?" The female voice was unfamiliar. "Can I talk to you?" "Who are you?" "You don't know me, but we need to meet. You're Elias's wife, right?" The speaker struggled visibly to pronounce the name. "There's something we need to discuss." Violeta didn't want to tell this stranger what had happened between her and Elias. If that scoundrel had gotten involved in any more dubious activities, he could deal with it himself. Violeta almost wanted to say that she wouldn't discuss anything, but then the girl on the other end of the line added, "Elias wanted to kill me." Violeta shuddered. Those words were spoken softly, but they hit like a gunshot. "Let's meet, and you can tell me everything," Violeta said into the phone. "Come to." "No." You will come to where I say, her interlocutor firmly stated. La Calle de Miguel, 45. Today at 2 o'clock. I'll be waiting. Short beeps were heard on the other end of the line. Violeta stood there, unsure whether she was alive or dead. What was this? Was it a trap? Perhaps thugs with baseball bats were waiting for her at that address, ready to take her hostage until her family paid a ransom? La Calle de Miguel was on the outskirts of the city, quite a criminal and depressing area where a decent girl shouldn't have walked alone in the evening. Of course, it would have been safer to bring someone along. But Timoteo, the only person whom Violeta fully trusted, was far away. It was absolutely out of the question to invite Uncle Domingo on such a trip. Given his temperament, Violeta knew he would burst through the door, fists flying, without even understanding who was right and who was wrong. No, she would have to go alone. She could only hope that her mysterious interlocutor didn't have any bad intentions. Just to be safe, Violeta informed the porter. If I don't come back, who knows what might happen? Anyway, write down the address La Calle de Miguel, 45. The panicked porter blinked rapidly. Is something wrong? Are you in trouble? But Violeta didn't tell him anything. She left the hotel and hailed a taxi. Remarkably, she was remarkably calm for someone heading into the unknown. Perhaps yesterday had drained every last drop of emotion from her. She couldn't fear or worry anymore and remained eerily calm, even as the car entered a rather unwelcoming neighborhood with gray 9-story buildings. Everything here looked grim: graffiti-covered concrete fences, playgrounds with broken swings, crooked benches near the entrances, overflowing garbage bins, and skinny, scruffy stray cats sniffing around them. And I thought we lived poorly, Violeta thought as she climbed the stairs, looking at the peeling walls of the stairwell. This is the real poverty. I look really out of place in my white faux fur coat against these worn-out walls. The door to the apartment looked just like the other doors in the stairwell. It was covered in old, dirty leather that was torn in several places. Violeta pressed the doorbell, and the door opened immediately. A young woman appeared in the doorway, probably Violeta's age or even younger. She was pregnant, and judging by her appearance, her due date was approaching. I'm Paulina, she introduced herself. Come in, put on these slippers. I didn't have time to clean up the space. Violeta entered, took off her coat, and began to scan the room for a coat rack. Finally spotting a place to hang her outerwear, she took off her boots and put on the slippers. They were a bit small, but she didn't complain. Come in. I made coffee, would you like some? Paulina asked. Violeta didn't decline. Paulina took an orange cup with a visible crack from the sideboard. The coffee was the cheapest kind. I would agree to meet you somewhere in a cafe, but I don't have a car or money for a taxi, and using public transport is difficult for me. I'm about to give birth soon. Paulina sat down on a chair across from Violeta and looked her in the face. This is your husband's child. Violeta flinched. Now she remembered that Katerina mentioned someone named Paulina in her conversation with Elias. So this was her. Are you his mistress? Violeta asked, studying her closely. Paulina was slim and short, with unremarkable facial features. Her eyes, with swollen eyelids, looked indifferent and somewhat drowsy. Greasy hair was pulled into a ponytail at the nape of her neck. We've been seeing each other for a long time now, Paulina began her story. For a few years. It turns out that Elias was having affairs with both of us at the same time. Considering him, I shouldn't be surprised, Violeta's thoughts raced. We met online, Paulina continued. In some chat, I don't remember exactly. We started talking, and then he charmed me. He knows how to. Violeta nodded, and as Paulina took a sip of her coffee, she resumed her story. I fell in love fairly quickly. He courted me beautifully, gave me gifts, and took me to various beautiful places. I didn't need much. I'm not the type of girl who's spoiled by male attention. I was over the moon, and look where it led me, Paulina concluded bitterly, placing her hand on her protruding belly. And then he tried to get rid of me. How did that happen? Violeta asked. At first, I didn't understand that he didn't want the child. I thought he was just confused. Then he started to contact me very rarely, didn't answer the phone. I started to realize that he wanted to break up with me. And that's what happened. In one of our conversations, he told me he wanted to marry a rich heiress. He offered me a small sum so I could get an abortion, but Here her eyes lit up for the first time in the conversation, burning with a vengeful light. I'm not the kind of person you can just kick to the curb like that. I'm not a dog that you kick in the belly and it whimpers and crawls away. I may not be beautiful, and I may not own gold mines, but I deserve respect. If Elias wants to get rid of me, the amount he offered for an abortion would be far too little. I suggested we talk, so to speak, to put an end to everything. I was planning to record our conversation on a recorder and then blackmail him. I invited him to my place, just like I did with you, and he came in all cheerful and charming. As usual, he started with his "I love only you, but you have to understand, this is better for both of us," and so on. He brought up the topic of abortion again, saying, "Who needs this child now?" I declined and said, "I'm going to give birth, and you're going to pay me child support, and I won't agree to anything else." So we talked. Paulina paused for a few seconds, then added, "Of course he grabbed me by the throat and started choking me. I was lucky he was so weak. I pushed him away, broke free, and he immediately started blabbering, 'I don't know what came over me, I'm sorry, forgive me.' But I kicked him to the curb. I listened to the recording, and I thought, there's my chance. One can hear everything, how I'm defending myself and how he's apologizing. If I took that to the police, that would be the end for Elias, he wouldn't see the daylight again. So, I messaged him, I told him to send the money, or else I'll have you thrown in jail. I mentioned the amount. He started dodging, saying he didn't have that much. He's a gambler, you know, he doesn't usually have big money, just debts. But I threatened him either the money or prison. Well, then he suggested I wait until the new year. He said that after the wedding, he'll have access to his wife's money, and he'll have it all. But in the end, he disappeared again. And what about me? I even knew who his fiancée was. So, think for yourself, Violeta, about what you should do. Do you want your beloved to end up behind bars? Or would you prefer to save him? In that case, pay me the amount I'm about to name. If I were you, I would be thinking about the child, not Elias, Violeta said calmly. It seems you're about to give birth soon. If you thought I would rush to save my husband, you've been gravely mistaken. I advise you to take the recording you have and go to the police with it. Or you can give it to me. I also have things to tell the police. Paulina smirked. And I thought you loved him. Your information is quite outdated. Violeta stood up and headed for the exit of the apartment. Elias may be a monster, but you. She wanted to say, you're not much better, but a heavy blow to the head made her lose consciousness. Never turn your back on your rival, fool. Violeta heard Paulina's voice through the foggy veil of her consciousness. Violeta woke up in an unfamiliar room, the door of which was securely locked. There was only a large, worn-out couch, some sagging chairs, and a sideboard as furniture in the room. A cottony silence hung in the air. Violeta didn't know how much time had passed since she lost consciousness, but judging by the darkness outside, it was late at night. I was afraid of thugs with baseball bats, and in the end, I got knocked out by a pregnant woman, Violeta noted ironically. She felt ashamed of her foolishness. Why did I come here alone? What was I hoping for? She thought in despair. She carefully surveyed her surroundings. On the sideboard, there were several photographs. In one of them, Violeta recognized Paulina. Only there, she looked completely different. She was graceful, young, with a mysterious gaze and flowing hair. She probably tried to look as pitiable as possible when I arrived, to evoke sympathy. And she succeeded to some extent at first, Violeta noted to herself. Initially, she babbled and played the role of a victim, but her eyes sparked when she started talking about revenge. No, Paulina wasn't an innocent victim, she was just as much a predator as Elias. But what should have Violeta done now? How to escape from here? Of course, the hotel porter knew where she went. But what if he simply dismissed the fact that a guest hadn't returned to her room for so long? Maybe she went out for a night of fun, who knows? Violeta paced around the room, pondering her options. The door was strong, breaking it was definitely out of the question. She approached the window. The flat was located on the 3rd floor. Of course, she had seen plenty of movies where characters descended using bedsheets. But she doubted she could do it herself. It was frightening. "Hey, you there!" A voice from behind the door, Paulina's voice, called out. She switched to a coarse manner. "Have you been scared enough, or do you want more?" Violeta decided not to respond. As long as Paulina didn't say anything specific, she needed some time. "Listen, rich bride." Paulina continued her speech. "I don't really need that much from you. Just your money and Elias. Take Elias right now, if you want." Violeta yelled out in her excitement. "He also tried to kill me." Wow. Paulina couldn't hide her surprise mixed with admiration. "Yes, he knew everything about me, including the fact that I'm allergic to peanuts. He wanted to make it an accident." "No way." Paulina let out a whistle. "He's growing more daring by the day. He nearly strangled me so easily, and here he had a whole plan. His mother came up with it, not him. He wouldn't have come up with such a plan on his own," Violeta reasoned. "Katerina? I respect women like her," Paulina started to ramble. "She is bold, strong, and always gets what she wants. I'd like to become like her over time. Maybe I'll manage it. You see, you're locked up here. Although, honestly, I thought you'd try to bargain with me. But you probably really don't love Elias at all. How can I love him when he almost sent me to the afterlife?" Violeta protested. "I don't want to see him after that." "Well, he nearly choked me too," Paulina said calmly, "so what? My father beat up my mother her whole life. But that's not important." "And what is?" Violeta was taken aback. "What's important?" "Love," Paulina declared firmly. "I love him, and I won't give him up to anyone, no matter what. Elias and I are the perfect couple, like Bonnie and Clyde. If he wanted to shoot up the whole world, I'd stand by his side and hand him the bullets." "She's just crazy." Violeta realized with horror. "She's obsessed with this damn Elias. But that doesn't make it any easier for me, just worse. Who knows what crazy thoughts are going on in her head and what she's capable of? What if she decides to get rid of me? Physically eliminate me? How do you even communicate with a crazy person gently or firmly? Should I threaten or appease her?" "Let me go," Violeta pleaded. "I'll give you as much money as you want." "Money is nice, of course, but there's a problem here," Paulina replied. "What if you go to the police after I free you?" "No, of course not," Violeta said convincingly. "I won't tell anyone." "I don't believe you," Paulina smirked. "You'll say anything now just to leave me. But why would I need to extort money from you if my plan is entirely different?" "What is the plan?" Violeta's heart froze. She suspected that ordinary extortion wasn't the main goal of the criminal. Paulina had a different goal from the very beginning. "Don't you have a clue?" Paulina taunted. "Put two and two together. Firstly, I'm madly in love with Elias and I want to be with him at any cost. But Elias loves something much more than me. No, not you, but your money. What do I need to do to make Elias come to me?" "Right. Make your money his money." "No." "Listen," Violeta began, her voice trembling with horror. "Trust me, even if you kill me and Elias gets my wealth, he still won't marry you. He doesn't love you." "What do you know about love?" Paulina suddenly shouted. You understand nothing about it. You're worthless. And Elias loves me, he does. You should have seen how he cried and begged for forgiveness. He was at my feet, begging. If it weren't for his debts, he would only be with me. He would carry me in his hands. He was on his knees in front of me too, Violeta began, but Paulina continued as if she hadn't heard her. He cried, said he would do anything to make me forgive him. When I remember his eyes, something turns inside me. Oh, and his little one in my belly moved. The child knows who I'm talking about. You know what Elias promised me? That we would live like in a fairy tale, on your money, Paulina chuckled. Violeta suddenly realized. Elias called you last night, didn't he? Yes, he did, Paulina said calmly. He said you're no longer needed and can be dealt with. The puzzle pieces fell into place. Cunning Elias figured out how to get rid of both Violeta and the insane blackmailer, Paulina, who undoubtedly gave him an ultimatum: either marry her or go to jail. Now he was killing two birds with one stone, or rather, getting rid of his wife through the hands of his lover. Crazy Paulina would kill Violeta and end up in prison, if not for life, then for a long time. And Elias would act like a grieving widower and spend Violeta's money. It was simply a brilliant plan, no worse than a fatal accident caused by anaphylactic shock, and perhaps even better. The only question was, did Elias come up with it himself, or did Katerina help him? What should she have done now? Try to convince Paulina that Elias was using her just like he did with Violeta? Attempt to soften her, or simply buy time in the hope that the situation will somehow resolve itself? While you're sitting there, you can think about life and death, Paulina said condescendingly. You can scream, stomp your feet, and tap on the radiator. We're in a neighborhood where almost every apartment has fights. You'll see, brave rescuers will rush to your aid immediately, she laughed. And in the morning, a person will come. In short, I called someone I know. You know, in this area, there are plenty of people who would cut your throat for a dose of drugs or even for that pretty white faux fur coat. Violeta held her breath. So, she had the night. There was not much time to escape from here. Listen, I need to use the bathroom. Let me out for a couple of minutes. Violeta understood that if she managed to get out, her strength would roughly match Paulina's. There's a potty under the couch. I bought it for the child, but it will work for you too, Paulina replied calmly. What a curse it was. She had thought of everything. Indeed, there was a child's potty under the couch. Can you give me some water to drink? Or coffee? Open the second drawer of the dresser. There's food, water, and even a magazine and a pen. There's no TV, sorry. We had one, but once there was a gathering of thugs here. They had a fight and broke it. Since then, I have no TV. Violeta sighed sadly. She didn't have a chance. Paulina wouldn't let her go. One last question. Tell me, where did you and Elias actually meet? Violeta asked. There was a camp for troubled teenagers. He got into games, started stealing. So, his mother placed him there. And I've had a tough path since birth. My father's in prison. My mother. God knows where. So fate brought Elias and me together. We've been together for a long time, 5 years now. You're just a mistake in his life. It was evident she was insane. Elias wanted to strangle her, abandoned a pregnant woman for a rich girl. And she's ready to kill for him. Well, that's enough. I'm going to sleep, Paulina suddenly said. I'm tired. I'll lie down here on the floor, just in case you manage to break the door. I doubt you have the strength, but you never know. Your phone, by the way, was ringing off the hook. I don't know who was looking for you, but they won't find you tomorrow. Paulina fussed on the floor for a while and then, apparently, actually fell asleep. It became very quiet. Who had been calling her? Her mother probably thought that she and Elias had gone on their honeymoon. Perhaps Timoteo, when he received her message, decided to call her after all. She had a purchase ticket and she could have been walking around the big city with Timoteo tomorrow. But, apparently, it wasn't meant to happen. Violeta paced the room from corner to corner until her legs grew tired. Then she sat on the couch and lay down. It hurt so much. Violeta was awakened by Paulina's frantic screams. "What's wrong?" "I think my water broke." "Call an ambulance." Yes, I'm calling." "It hurts." "Doctor, help. I'm giving birth." La Calle de Miguel, 45. What a turn of events. Violeta held her breath. Now she definitely had a chance to escape. However, it was unknown how long it would take for the ambulance to arrive in this hole. There was a chance that Paulina might give birth on her own during that time. Behind the door, Paulina was crying out in pain repeatedly. "Let me out!" Violeta screamed. "I'll help you. Let me out." But Paulina seemed to have stopped hearing anyone except her own body. She wasn't reacting to Violeta's cries, she was desperately trying to break down the locked door. Apparently, Paulina was right when she said that their screams wouldn't move anyone here. Neighbors weren't banging on radiators or trying to break down the door, as if the wild cries from the neighboring apartment were something ordinary and familiar to them. "Paulina, listen to me, open the door." "Open the door, weirdo!" Violeta screamed, pulling at the door with all her strength. "Let me out. Anyway, your plan has failed." And then, a knock came at the entrance door. It was a strong, loud, and demanding knock. The ambulance arrived quickly, Violeta thought, and then she heard. "Open the door. It's police." It was a familiar voice. God, could it be him? How did he find her? "Open up right now, or we'll break the door down." Another voice, equally familiar. "I'll count to 3, 1, 2. There was a crash in the corridor, then Paulina's piercing, heart-rending scream, followed by a stern question. "Where is she? Where's Violeta? Don't touch her. She's in labor." Violeta yelled. "I'm here." The door to the room swung open. Timoteo stood in the doorway. His face was red, his eyes darkened with anger, and the knuckles of his right hand were bloody. Violeta clung to his neck. "You saved me. You saved me. What the hell is happening here? Who is this woman, and why is she screaming as if she's in labor?" Uncle Domingo looked into the room. "Because she really is in labor," Violeta answered him. "This is a very strange story." At that moment, doctors finally appeared at the apartment door. They didn't even ask why the door was broken. They swiftly loaded the screaming Paulina into the ambulance and drove her to the maternity ward. Finally, it became quiet in the apartment. They didn't want to stay in this unfamiliar and unfriendly place. "You two go ahead, I'll deal with the door a bit," Uncle Domingo said. "It's a bit inconvenient. We leave, and the apartment remains open." "Uncle Domingo, I wouldn't advise you to stay here," Violeta said. "Paulina said that someone dangerous would come in the morning, a dangerous person." "Well, when they come, they'll leave," the man said calmly. "We broke the door, so we'll put it back." Violeta and Timoteo exited the building. Violeta was staggering from fatigue and the shock she had experienced. She felt like she was in an absurd movie that just wouldn't end. "I missed you so much," she told Timoteo. "Forgive me for everything. I was wrong. I didn't appreciate your love and loyalty." Timoteo silently held her close. "I believed Elias, his false words, his looks of complete adoration. I didn't listen to you or Mom, even though you both warned me that something was off about Elias. I lived in my sweet illusions. And only when he tried to kill me did I understand everything." Timoteo gently stroked Violeta's head. "I was so foolish to come here all alone. I thought I'd just talk to that woman. I thought she might send Elias to jail, but she turned out to be in love with him. Can you imagine? She turned out to be crazy and wanted to kill me. Why does everyone want to kill me? I haven't done anything wrong to anyone. It's all about the money, Violeta. It's all about them. Timoteo spoke to Violeta as if she were a little child, and she just couldn't calm down. These cursed money. I'll give it all away tomorrow, donate every last penny to charity. I'll earn my own living. I'll manage. I'll go back to cleaning floors at the Golden Pitcher. Well, that might be unnecessary, Timoteo smiled. As for earning, it's a good idea, I like it. Listen, how did you find me? Violeta asked, feeling slightly calmer. I saw your message and realized that something bad had happened. You wouldn't have sent something like that from your honeymoon. So, most likely, something bad happened. I knew where your wedding was being held. I also knew about the hotel you were supposed to go to. I came there and asked the doorman. He told me about the runaway bride. I decided to ask taxi drivers. Luckily, a few drivers often worked around that hotel, and they knew each other well. Of course, I had to lie, claiming to be your lover, as if I'm the groom and we had an argument yesterday. You ran away, so I can't find you. I had to give some money, I couldn't avoid that. In the end, I found that guy. He told me which hotel he took you to. Then, at the hotel, the doorman gave me the address you told him. So, I thought it would be safer to bring Uncle Domingo along. We rushed as if we were crazy. We were afraid that something had happened to you. It was lucky that that lunatic didn't manage to kill you. Wait, Violeta exclaimed in surprise. How were you able to do all of this when you were away? Well, Timoteo hesitated, there's a story behind it. Forgive me, Violeta, but I lied to you. I wasn't on a work trip. I went to another city for just a couple of days in December and returned from there a long time ago. I just really didn't want to go to the wedding. But why? Violeta mumbled. What was the point of lying? Well, who would enjoy watching their beloved girlfriend marry someone else? Timoteo blurted out and blushed deeply. And then Violeta kissed him. They were standing by the entrance and kissing, with the sunrise appearing behind the house. It was the most beautiful dawn in their lives. Are you cold? Timoteo asked when they pulled away from each other to catch their breath. Your coat is still in the apartment. I'm warm next to you, Violeta replied. And I won't set foot in that horrible apartment again. Let's go home. Violeta walked home and thought that the feeling she had for Elias wasn't really love at all. True love isn't about gifts and compliments, it's about trust and mutual support. In reality, she had loved Timoteo since their school days, she just hadn't realized it. But in a difficult moment, it was him she wanted to turn to first. He was her hero and savior. And now Violeta was truly happy. She was no longer afraid to tell her mother and Aunt Susanna about everything that had happened. Memories of how Elias had betrayed her no longer caused Violeta pain. The story of this pitiful pseudo-love had come to an end. What will you do about Elias? Timoteo asked when they were already home, and the whole family had gathered in the kitchen, following their tradition, to discuss the situation. I suggest filing a report against him, Andrea said. Let him be held accountable for his crime to the fullest extent of the law. I'd just give him a beating, and that's it, Uncle Domingo chimed in. By the time the trial comes around, so much time will have passed. I think Elias will be punished by a higher power, Aunt Susanna interjected. God sees everything. To be honest, I'd prefer to just file for divorce and forget about him, Violeta said. I don't have any evidence to go to the police anyway. It would be my word against his. We'd just waste time. And what about that crazy woman, Paulina? Andrea asked. She hit you on the head with something heavy and kept you captive for half a day. I feel sorry for her, she's such a poor thing, Violeta confessed. Paulina isn't to blame for going completely insane over her love for Elias. Besides, she recently gave birth to a child. How can they put her in prison? You're kind, Violeta, Timoteo sighed. That's why I love you. And also for your incomparable braid. Pablo cautiously entered the kitchen. He looked gloomy and was casting sidelong glances. "Aunt Violeta," he finally said, "this is all fine, of course, but where's my gun?" The whole family burst into laughter. Violeta kept her word. She donated all the money left from her father's inheritance to a foundation that dealt with orphan children's issues. She believed that along with this money, people like Elias, Katerina, and Paulina would also disappear from her life. She successfully and without much trouble divorced Elias, and after that, her former spouse disappeared from Violeta's view. He dropped out of school and was soon expelled from the university. Rumor had it that Elias had to hide from thugs to whom he owed a large sum of money that he couldn't repay due to gambling it all away. Some say the thugs eventually caught up with Elias, and now he was the food for fish at the bottom of some pond. Others were more optimistic, believing that the hapless gambler had moved to the other end of the country, where nobody knew him. Perhaps there he continued to play games with young girls. And some other naive Violeta had fallen for his trap. One day, in a shopping center, Violeta bumped into Katerina. The girl didn't recognize her former mother-in-law right away. "How much are these jewels?" the customer asked the saleswoman, and Violeta was hit with a wave of cold. She wouldn't mistake that voice for any other. It was the voice of the woman who once wanted to kill her. 2,700, the saleswoman replied. "This is outrageous," Katerina muttered. It was hard enough to recognize her face. Perhaps she had undergone unsuccessful plastic surgery. Her eyes had become narrow slits, and they had moved up towards her temples. The skin on her face was stretched so tight that it seemed like it could crack at any moment, and her lips were twisted grotesquely, like overcooked sausages. And once, this woman seemed as beautiful to Violeta as an ancient statue. After some time, Violeta also learned about Paulina's fate. Unfortunately, after giving birth to her child, Paulina completely lost her sanity. The newborn child didn't interest her at all. The only person who mattered to Paulina was Elias. She loudly and persistently demanded that Elias come to her. She caused such a commotion in the maternity ward that she terrified all the other mothers. Then she began to scream that she needed to kill her rival so that Elias would definitely marry her. Eventually, Paulina started seeing her rival in every woman and attacked one of those unfortunate souls who happened to be near her. Fortunately, the victim of her attack escaped with just a fright. In the end, Paulina was persuaded to sign away her parental rights, and she was sent for involuntary treatment to a psychiatric clinic, where she remains to this day. The child was put up for adoption. Now he has good, loving parents. And 2 years later, at the Golden Pitcher restaurant, Violeta's birthday was being celebrated. The birthday lady looked stunning. She wore an emerald green floor-length dress that elegantly revealed a part of her back. Her hair was braided and styled around her head, resembling a sort of crown. The day before, Violeta had learned that she had been invited for an internship at a major international company. The future seemed incredibly bright ahead of her. Only her closest friends were invited to the celebration. In the intimate circle of her family, the young woman felt extraordinarily happy. She looked at the elegantly decorated hall, at the joyful faces of her loved ones, and she thought that the greatest happiness is when those who wish you well are by your side. Violeta remembered her wedding. On one hand, that day had been the most dreadful in her life, but on the other hand, the old taxi driver had been right. She was happy. She managed to escape her fate. Even if Elias hadn't tried to kill her on their wedding night, she would hardly have been happy by his side. Surely, years later, Violeta would have become one of those women perpetually complaining to her friends about her awful husband. And a mother-in-law like Katerina would have turned Violeta's life into a living hell. "Violeta, what are you thinking about?" Andrea asked her daughter. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, Mom," Violeta replied. "Everything's perfectly fine. I'm just so glad you're here with me. Thank you for everything. Without your support, I wouldn't have achieved anything in life. The father I never knew left me a massive inheritance. But what did those riches bring me? They nearly cost me my life. Your father wanted to make amends with you, Violeta's mother replied. But he should have done that while he was alive. Money can't fill the hole in your heart that remains after being betrayed by a loved one. What are you whispering about over there? Aunt Susanna asked. I bet you're discussing how I look like a cow in this dress. No, they're just jealous of you, Uncle Domingo said, hugging his wife. You look good in any outfit. Thank you, dear, Aunt Susanna said, pecking her husband's cheek. Why don't you go check on what the kids are up to? I don't see Pablo anywhere. Pablo, once a troublemaker, had long transformed into one of those teenagers you can't tear away from a computer or phone. He had hidden behind the adults and was engrossed in playing some mobile game, periodically exclaiming things like, "Take that! Got you! What, have you eaten it?" His little sister, Elias, dressed in a luxurious ball gown, was running around the hall, twirling and shouting, "I'm a princess! Hooray! I'm a princess like Aunt Violeta." Everyone was happy and making noise when the master of ceremonies took the stage and announced, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I ask for a moment of your attention. Tonight, you will witness a debut performance. This is a bard who will perform a song of his own composition. He's quite nervous, so please show your support." The audience applauded in unison. Timoteo stepped onto the stage. He held a guitar in his hands. He was sitting on a specially prepared stool, adjusted the microphone, and began. I've always been afraid of the stage, of being in the spotlight. It scared me so much that I was ready to hide anywhere, even under the baseboard like a cockroach, just so no one would pay attention to me. Violeta, my best friend, constantly tried to persuade me to be braver, not to be afraid to perform. But her words didn't hit home he sighed, until one day I realized a simple truth. If you keep hiding behind the baseboard all the time, the girl you love will end up with someone else. You mustn't be afraid to stand out and step onto the stage of life. I learned this important lesson from someone to whom I want to dedicate this song. Violeta, this song is for you. Timoteo started singing. His voice was soft, but very pleasant. Every word of his simple yet heartfelt song was filled with so much love that all the guests couldn't help but be moved. Even Pablo was momentarily distracted from his mobile game. After Timoteo finished singing, the hall erupted in applause. But the most significant reward for Timoteo that day was Violeta's shining eyes. She looked at him with love and admiration, just as a woman looks at a hero who has accomplished a feat for her. When they were alone, Timoteo said, Violeta, I know I can't catch up to you. A successful career is predicted for you, and I'll probably achieve no more than performing for the golden pictured guests. I'm just a simple guy who can never shower you with gold. But I love you, and you know that. That's why I've gathered the courage to ask you to be my wife. He took a small box from his pocket with a modest yet elegant ring. Timoteo. Violeta threw her arms around his neck. I've been waiting for this. You finally made up your mind. Of course, I agree.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.